I would say this very simply, and if this was the only thing anybody heard from this podcast, this would be it. You cannot outwork your nervous system. You can't outwork your nervous system. See, what's interesting is the reason I smirked a little bit and smiled when you were talking is because on a lot of levels, it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur. And that's what makes it so hard.
Welcome to the Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth podcast. I am your host, Nathan Barkocy. In the True Wealth community and on this podcast, we are passionate about creating time freedom, impact, and purpose through real assets and real relationships, because true wealth isn't solely what you have, it's who you become. And welcome back to the Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be honored by a great friend of mine, an incredibly inspiring man, Paul Blanchard. Paul is the founder of the Whole Body Mindset. And so I'm so excited to dive into everything that Paul is going to explain to us today, everything that he's been able to help enlighten to me, because I've gained a lot of understanding and wisdom from Paul. And I'm very excited to dive into this. So Paul, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, Nathan. It's good to be here. I mean, it's not quite the mountain biking ride that we got to have last time we were together, but hey, I'll take some good conversation and we'll make the most of it.
That was a lot of fun. So yeah, tell my audience about what you and I decided to do right before the launch of my book.
So a mutual friend of ours reached out to me, asked me to come down to Phoenix to spend some time with him and to support a mutual friend of ours, of course, the amazing Sharon Lecter. And then he started telling me about this Nathan Barkocy and like just about your background and your history. I was like, this dude sounds dope. He's like, yeah, in fact, he might actually come riding bikes with us when you're down here, if you can get down here soon enough. I was like, well, that's reason enough for me to come down. And so I did, and you agreed to get out on the trails with us on a bike, and it was super fun. We had a major blast. It was a pretty significant time as far as anniversaries for you, let alone being on a bike. And that just, there was something that felt really, almost sacred about that. And I don't think I shared that with you at the time. We were probably just having so much fun with our inner 10-year-olds coming around as we, I remember all the race car noises I was making as we were going up and down the trail and just having so much fun with all of that. But I tell people, if you want to learn more about someone's character, like get them out on a bike ride or a hike or something like that. It's a great dating principle as well. Or behind the wheel of a car. You'll usually learn a lot about them. And if that was my only exposure to you whatsoever, like there was a pretty good feeling like, hey, I want to spend more time with this person. This is someone who I know a big part of what we're talking about here is not just true wealth, but like trying to take that beyond like a slogan and actually represent the resonance of that, not as just some cute thing of, real assets and real relationships, but a demonstration of that. And you certainly live a demonstration of that essence. Before I even learned as much about the true wealth system and the book and everything, which I learned a lot more about from you and from Sharon over the next few days after that. So yeah, I'm super happy to be here. That was a killer way to kick it off. I'll remember that for a long, long time, and I'm excited to see where we go here.
Well, Paul, thank you. I mean, that means a lot to hear that, and I think it was a very humbling experience to be on the bike with you. Because our dear friend Eric Swanson, who was riding with us, kept calling out, we have the Olympian, because that was where I was headed, and you guys were all on e-bikes, and I was just on a regular bike, and so you were smoking me up some of those hills. Plus, by the end of the ride, you were just flying, and all of us our legs were feeling it. So,
yeah, the e-bike, the leveling of the playing field, it was super fun.
Yeah, it was a great ride. So, thank you for really celebrating with us, and that was, 10 years to the day of my accident that we hopped on those bikes and we got to go on some fun trails and have a great time. So it definitely was, the establishment of true wealth, really, for our relationship and for the future going forward. And so this is why I'm so excited that we're diving into this today, because I think that understanding that you have is so important to share with I guess an audience of mine that's listening, and maybe they just feel drowned out by all of the hustle that they're putting in, right? And all of the work that they're putting in. Sometimes I even still feel this, right? That you're just overworking, right? You're pushing yourself too far. So you talk a lot about leaders who've, read the books, built the teams, scaled the revenue, but they're quietly realizing the ROI of hustle and discipline, and that's diminishing, right? So what's actually happening when that shift begins for them?
That's a phenomenal question. I think in order to start having some fun with that and exploring that a little bit, at least I find it super helpful. Those listening may not, so I'll be brief. But zooming out and looking at the different stages of human development, looking at the different epochs, we've got the hunter-gatherer epoch, which is where kind of our recorded history or our anthology begins. And then we shifted into this agricultural epoch as human beings. And then we moved into agrarian, which was kind of more of a automated, optimized version of agricultural. And then we went into industrial. And most lately, we've been in a technological epoch. What's interesting, though, is each one seems to build upon the next, but there are usually things that are being asked to be at least softened, if not dissolved, and let go of as we move into the next one. And there's some through lines that don't seem to want to let go. And right now in the technological epoch, which I believe we're actually in the middle of a shift into the next epoch, I could speculate on what I think it is. The closest thing I can come up with is some kind of conscious coherence in terms of where we're moving to. That's where all the signs tend to point in terms of what seems to make sense, what has kind of been created to make some room for. But in a more consciousness-based epoch that we seem to be moving into, which one of the easiest ways to be able to see that, both in the dilemma of the shift and where we're headed, is people are having challenges with things they don't have words for yet. That's something I'm running into a lot. I've been coaching for 20 years. I've studied the brain patterns objectively measured by Nobel Prize award-winning mathematics in over 300,000 entrepreneurs and leaders and business owners and executives. And so I have a little bit of exposure to kind of what's going on under the surface. And so many people today are feeling something they can't explain. They're experiencing something they're not quite sure how to put words to. And so much of it comes down to a system that isn't creating the same ROI, something that isn't appropriate anymore. And we were on the last leg of what I would call like the industrial soul, which was actually very tied to our hunter-gatherer time, which was very hustle, very drive, very do so much today for tomorrow kind of thing. That was the existential rationalization, at least. In hunter-gatherer times, it was do everything today because there is, you don't know if there's going to be tomorrow, and there's actually a really good chance there won't be because most of us didn't make it very far. But the industrial soul was a really interesting development because it pulled people out of a natural rhythm of, everybody growing their own food, everybody having enough kids to be able to support the land and then take over and take care of older. We had multi-generational houses, all these things that I would never argue we have to go back to, but we're going to want to look at what it provided and what a consciousness epoch, what a coherence epoch would want to reinstill in us that it did provide. And interestingly, some of the things it did provide was a much more intrinsic attachment to wealth, where it wasn't about profits. It wasn't about badges of honor for how much you sold your company for or whatever. It was intrinsic. It was invaluable. It was pricelessness, was the undercarriage of wealth. It was presence. It was experiences. And those things, not instead of, as well as relationships. I mean, that was a huge part of the undercarriage for quite a long time. Now, in early epochs, relationships were necessity. They were absolutely crucial. If you didn't have good relationships, you were toast. This idea that only the strong survive is silly, because that's not true. It's the connected. The people with relationship are the ones who are still around today in terms of human civilizations. This whole alpha, solo, I'm a badass kind of, like, that was the first dude to die. for thousands and thousands of years, and we had certain instincts that would draw us back into that place. One of them being shame. Shame was a survival instinct that was purely just for conformity. If I wanted to go start doing my own thing, I would feel shame to go back to the tribe and stay with what everybody's doing, because 100,000 years ago, that's how you stayed alive. But now today, conformity has to do with certain social pressures, certain pressures of like how you're supposed to show up and what's the right thing. And everyone has a different preference. Everyone has a different perspective, whether it's religiously or socially or relationally or all these different things, fashion, all of it. And so it gets very confusing. And so shame moved from a survival instinct to an existential crisis, to this belief that there is something wrong with me. And it's kind of ideal by design for a lot of what has made the industrial machine continue to work the way that it has, is because if I feel existentially flawed and there's no way for something outside of me to ever relieve that, but I can be convinced that there is, I'll chase it endlessly. I'll pay for it endlessly. I'll work endlessly for it. And oftentimes miss that true, or what I would say just slightly more inclusive, the intrinsic wealth, the intrinsic relationships that hustle culture, that hustle porn is what I've been calling it for the last little while, that got us so convinced of becoming something from doing, rather than belonging to ourselves and then letting ourselves naturally become more, I think is something we've kind of lost touch with, and now are shifting into a time and an era, I guess, if you will, where that is coming back into focus. A lot of things in the world and human development are secular, and it's coming back, and people aren't quite sure what to do with it in some of its ways that it seems to be in competition with how you must show up to survive in the world, how you must be successful, what you must do to be successful. And what's awesome is people are learning more about how to work through trauma and shame and attachment wounds. There is a small but really powerful contingent of people learning that when you can regulate your nervous system, when you can work through the sensory experience of shame and trauma and attachment wounds, not sit in a chair and talk about it in talk therapy, actually work through it in the body, in the biointelligence of the body, that you can look at a system and you can break the rules and still be successful. I work less than I ever have in my entire life, and I make way more than I ever have. And that hasn't been on accident. It's been from breaking some rules. It's been from playing games that I didn't know we were allowed to play. Like, I thought the game we had to play was work your ass off and make as much money as you can so that you can make a great impact in the world. When suddenly I stopped and was like, why do I have to work so hard for it? And that's when I realized some of my programming was, well, because if you don't work tirelessly for it, you aren't actually worthy of it. If you have lots of money and you're not working like crazy, you're a scoundrel. You're cheating people. That's what I found deep in the system. So then I got to start playing a different game. And I think these kinds of games and these kinds of breaking the rules, these kinds of, like The Village, where we're convinced that like there's monsters out there and there's really not, but it's still scary to go out and challenge it. We can start playing more and more games like the one I play now and that I play with my clients. And that's what's the least amount of work I can do to get the most amount of abundance.
So that's a huge mindset shift, right? Because I like how you're talking about how we're the hustle culture. I have to be honest, right? I will have a confession here that I have done the same thing. I just keep chasing new things to do, keep chasing more projects, keep chasing all this stuff. And it's great, right? When it works out, it's awesome. But you sacrifice your time, right? You sacrifice your true wealth. And yeah, point blank honesty, right? I've sacrificed a lot of true wealth to build more, build faster, right? It's very new wealth, that's the new wealth trend. And then of course you scale the new wealth with the security and the long-term accumulation of the old wealth. But the true wealth is that ownership of your time, and you can't own your time when you're just hustling. And I like how you discussed how we're really shifting into more of a consciousness awakening, right? And this is what I've heard from a lot of people on my podcast, right? JV Crum was talking about this. A lot of other guests that I've had have been talking about how this is kind of the shift that's really happening with us. And so that's really fascinating to me. Can you dive into a little bit more detail regarding that, our conscience and our understanding of such?
Yeah. So I don't profess to know all the perfect details and ins and outs. It just seems to be the story that makes the most sense. It seems to be the one that checks the most boxes, not because it's totally or absolutely true, but because it gives us more liberties than we would have had before. Like Galileo, who went, "No, I don't think everything revolves around the earth." And he gets misrepresented as having said that actually everything revolves around the sun. He didn't say that. What Galileo actually said is it makes more sense. The math works better if we assume everything revolves around the sun because of all the information we have so far. That's the best assumption we can make so far. It wasn't him saying absolute, because people will talk about like, well, even Galileo said that, and that turned out to not be true. No, well, that's not what he said. He just said this is the best guess we have so far. And so I want to make sure that we all have permission to realize that we're all guessing.
We all guess at everything, right?
Totally, because it's all made up.
Well, I'll give you what. Some guesses are a little bit more educated than others. So
Sure.
this is why I'm interested to talk to you right now, because I know you've done a lot of due diligence to get to this guess of yours.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't profess to know exactly why we've gone through the track that we have in human development. I think that it's very interesting. But one of my favorite models that I think offers some really interesting insights is spiral dynamics. And in spiral dynamics, you've got these layers of consciousness. And no matter how advanced we become, right now we're flirting with I believe the 8th level of consciousness. The 7th is relatively new in terms of having a prominent representation in civilization. But no matter how advanced we become in the levels of consciousness, there's a couple of things that are really important to know. One is every human being born on planet Earth starts at the base, what's called beige level of consciousness, pure sensory survival. Every baby born is not born coming out, talking and having a sense of ego and self and differentiation. That all comes way later in life. They come out in a purely sensory experience, pure human animal when a baby is born. And then those layers of consciousness are grown. The second thing is understanding that every layer, that the full spectrum of the spiral, we are at our best as human beings when every layer is allowed to be represented. And what's interesting about spiral dynamics is the recent, in the last few decades, introduction of the 7th level, and now the introduction of the 8th level of consciousness, or what's called second tier consciousness, okay? And no one needs to track all of this other than to say, the second tier is relatively new in being able to be tracked in spiral dynamics. And it's the first layer of consciousness that can actually appreciate every layer of consciousness. Before that, the first 6, it was only human to believe that whatever level of consciousness you were at was the most important. It was the answer. And each one before that was inferior, and there couldn't possibly be one after that. And yet, now we find ourselves moving into this state that what used to work, what has been so reliable, is not reliable. What has been back to the basics, back to this, back to that, we're not able to get back to anymore. I think there's something really interesting to be studied and learned that we'll see unfold over the coming decades about what happened during the global pandemic that I think was actually as horrific as that experience was on so many levels, from the devastation, the loss, the deception, all these different things tied to it on all sides, wherever you sit on it. It was significant and horrible and difficult. I think that it was some kind of kick into whatever this next piece is coming to that needed to happen for a cleaner break, so to speak, to be able to.
So how are we supposed to, because I think we can all kind of sense that, right? And so how are we supposed to take that and move forward, most especially in regard to business, right? There's a big shift in business right now, right? And especially in America, I've said this on many podcasts too, right? It's so hard to be an entrepreneur nowadays because I mean, I think it was Andrew Tate who said that, if you got $1 million back in the 70s, you go start a business, right? But if you get $1 million today, you can't compete. So you just put it in the stock market, and so that's how it builds, right? And that's what we have to compete against. And so I'm curious how this shift, right? How this mindset shift is going to really affect business moving forward, and how you would advise, an entrepreneur and also a businessman from today, how to take action in order to manifest their creations
Yeah.
in this mindset shift, right?
I would say this very simply, and if this was the only thing anybody heard from this podcast, this would be it. You cannot outwork your nervous system. You can't outwork your nervous system. See, what's interesting is the reason I smirked a little bit and smiled when you were talking is because on a lot of levels, it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur. And that's what makes it so hard.
Okay. Yeah.
Because we need it to be so hard. I've laughingly told so many people just in the last several weeks, the hardest thing I've ever done was learn to let my life be easy.
Right.
Like I spent years as a business coach I had an impressive track record of taking people from, making a few $100,000 a year to making millions of dollars a year consistently. And that was super fun, but there was a lot of hustle involved. There was a lot of the glory comes later. You'll get to live your life later kind of a thing, because that's what we believe to be true. So that's what we would create. And easy was a 4-letter word. Easy was, as a business coach who was drive, we're going to make the money, we're going to put the plans, we're going to have the discipline, which is punishment, by the way. The root of that word is punishment. And so then we've got to spend as much time punishing ourselves as we do justifying the punishment, which creates these needs that we have, that creates the requirement that then becomes the thing that just keeps feeding itself, the vicious cycle that we get pulled into. And I remember when I decided to be curious about whether my life could be easy and successful, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I still have stuff to work through, but some of the biggest work required sitting on the ledge of what felt like a cliff of betrayal. Like even feeling like I was betraying my family for not burning the candle at both ends and making it work and whatever and blah, blah, blah and all this stuff. And having these moments where I went, if I have to work like that to justify that, I'll take the consequences. And sitting right on that ledge, terrified and jumping, and then finding a soft landing on the other side, being like, whoa, I didn't smash to my death. Whoa, there's a whole other landscape over here I didn't know existed. And no matter how familiar I become with it and how much I want to run back and tell everybody, like, it's so much better down there. It's so much easier down there. It doesn't matter. That only lands here when the actual shift has got to happen in the biointelligence, in the actual nervous system, in your actual body. Like a mindset shift, Nathan, is not just the cognitive neocortex, but that's what we've been convinced in 30, 40 years of personal development mindset is it's a thinking thing. It's a brain thing. It's not. That's one of 3 aspects. You've got the thinker mind, the head mind. You got the heart mind, which is the mammalian aspect, the emotional intuitive aspect. And then you've got the gut mind, which is the reptilian pattern-based survival aspect. And they each have their own superpowers. They each have their own language. They each have their own kryptonite to their superpowers. They each have their own gifts, and they each have their own objectives. And we've been so head mind dominant that the head mind has believed it had to take over for the heart and the gut. Most people's experience of their actual sensory experience is not their feelings. It's their head's reaction to their feelings. Most people, when I start to work with them, do not know how to feel what they're feeling. Sounds crazy to say it out loud, but it's true. They don't know how to feel what they're feeling. They only know how to feel their head's reactions to their feelings. And if we can't feel what we're actually feeling, how are we supposed to become who we actually are? Or remember that, if you want to get more poetic, to get back to our original instructions. How are we to get to our true self if we can't feel what we're truly feeling? And if we can't get to our true self, how are we going to know what true wealth is when we find it?
Right. Yeah. Because we may not even understand where where true wealth comes from or what it is once we achieve it, right? That's why I think it's so important for someone like yourself, for someone like myself to be able to bring that message to the world, because we've been so misled, And so I think that really plays in. You really just, answered this on a broad level, but I'm curious how you would actually define, a business that plugs into the nervous system, because you've always talked about building businesses that plug into the nervous system. So is it all in reference to your mind, right? And that absorption?
Yeah. So the first step to building a business that resonates with your nervous system is being able to welcome yourself. We have such a dopaminergic view in society today, such a more press on forward. We have over a dozen neurotransmitters in our system that are built to make right now feel so alive and feel so awesome. Oxytocin, serotonin, other endorphins. You've got all these things built to make right now our current state feel awesome. And you've got one neurotransmitter that's built for more, and that's dopamine. But 99% of the coaching programs, the business plans, the things out there are built dominantly around 100% dopamine driven, and then everything else after. That you've got to take care of that first. But if you look at the way we have evolved as human beings, if we could be humble enough to look at the last 100,000 years and how far we've come, it came from developing a deep appreciation and love and presence for right now, and then a little bit of more. And we flipped that scale on its head. So learning how to welcome yourself does something absolutely amazing, which sounds soft and gushy and dumb to the high performer at first, just like it did to me. But when you can actually welcome yourself, then you can belong to yourself. And when you can actually belong to yourself on a neurological level, it's actually safe to feel what you're feeling. It's actually safe to be in your body, which most people have no idea what that actually feels like. I thought I did. I remember when I was told, well, you're not in your body, Paul. I was like, of course I am. I have an amazing relationship with my body. I work out all the time, all these things. I take care of it, blah, blah, blah. And when I finally stepped back and realized that my relationship with my body was based on what I could put it through, not an actual relationship, I realized I didn't belong to my body and my body didn't belong to me. One of the things that threw me into kind of this realization, a few different things, but one of the more PC ones we'll talk about, is a coach told me, okay, you want to challenge this, or you want to challenge? It's like every day when you shower, I want you to actually put your hands on your body and just look at yourself and say, I love you out loud to your body. Of course, there's the part of me that's like, that's super weird. But then there's the pride in me that's like, okay, I can do that. And I did it. And I did it for a few weeks. And it was uncomfortable. And it was weird. And it was like, what am I doing? But as I kind of let myself get beyond that haze and confusion and resistance, I started to realize how welcome I wasn't in my own body and how welcome my body wasn't with me. And if that's not the case, if you don't belong to your nervous system and your nervous system doesn't feel like it belongs to you because it's push and go and lack of worthiness and all these different things, and whether you are a noble victim, which is the person who works all the hours and everybody knows it, or whether you're the less noble victim that just whines and complains, that you're both victims, and that's most of society today. And you can't convince me one is better or worse. They're each going to have different challenges to work through. But once you can belong, then you can actually become. And we've got it backwards. Hustle culture is you become, which is really disguised, nice, conscious speak for you do and you achieve. And once you do and achieve, then you belong. No, the nervous system is built to belong first, because once it feels like it belongs, it feels safe. Once it feels safe, it releases a reserve of about at least 40 to 60% of energy, which means you can get more done in less time and feeling like less effort, which means you can work less and accomplish more, which means life can feel easier and you can still be really successful. So that's why the first step would be to be able to learn how to welcome you, all the parts of you, your head mind, your heart mind, and your gut mind, which aren't just symbolic representations. These are actual separate neural networks. In embryo, your heart is formed first. It's one of the most complex neural networks we have. And then it lends tissue to the brain and the gut to be formed, which are the next most complex neural networks we have. But modern science started here, and so it convinced that it was a top-down system. It's actually not. The brain receives more information than it gives out commands. It's
Yeah.
more reactive than it is the command center, which is all hints and clues that, like, if you try to outwork your nervous system, it will win. And you'll get to the top, and your pride will either be so inflamed at that point that you'll convince yourself that it was totally worth it, even though some deep part of you knows otherwise, or you'll come into the flaming hellfire of regret of like, oh, damn, what was I chasing? Because that's what we're calling becoming now, is chasing. We're
Which I
trying
think
to
is
chase.
right. And that's the biggest portion, or the temptation that holds us back, really, is that pride, And I think it's always because the grass is always greener, right? So everyone's always looking at something else thinking, oh, if that could only be me, no matter what phase you're in, right? And you can always think, oh, it could be better, or we could have this, or it takes a lot of humility to realize that sometimes you're the bottleneck, right? Like, I'm the bottleneck to a lot of my business work. I have to be able to build those systems, build those teams, right? Because it's a community. It's just like the body, right? It's like you're saying, it's not just one system. It's the mind, the heart, and the gut. And that's incredible. How were you able to shift from, working with these high performers, right, and scaling these businesses so effectively with so much hustle, of course, while you're doing that? What was the turning point that really made you realize that it all goes so much deeper, right? That it really is interior, that
Yeah.
we can start finding those changes.
It's a great question. It's a great question. There's a couple of things that come to mind. The first one is something just felt off. That's as I can't really say it more substantially than that, which is what a lot of people are feeling today. I may have had a little bit of a head start, not because I'm better than anyone, but I was built a little different. I used to sneak out of the house when I was 12 with a girl down the street to go to local playground, and we'd look at the stars and talk about the meaning of life. Like, I thought that was normal. Like,
Right.
I've always been obsessed with the human experience and like finding that the man behind the curtain, Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Not to be like, it's crap, but to be like, oh, and what else? Like, okay, that's so interesting. And so it just fell off. Secondly, after doing that kind of coaching for enough years, I'd have enough clients come back years later, and they had the same intrinsic challenges, the same problems. They were just more expensive now. There's just bigger numbers. And that didn't feel okay. And then there was a myriad of other things in my own life, bankrupting my own business, literally, and my marriage, and all kinds of things. That, like, to have a total existential bankruptcy was certainly played a certain role in that, and waking up to some things. I'm not ashamed to say psychedelics played a small role in that. I say small though, because I think it gets a lot more credit than it deserves. I think it deserves to get some credit for certain people therapeutically. I think that's starting to come about. People starting to see it's not some risque, just, for weirdos. Like, it has really beautiful impacts on trauma, and like the work they're doing with first responders and veterans and stuff like that is incredible. But being obsessed with the human experience, yeah, of course, I was going to go out to the jungles and drink the strange brews and see the visions, because I was curious about the human experience part of that. And that opened up some things that I don't know would have been opened up otherwise, for consideration. But that by no means is a required track for anybody. It's just some of the things that I noticed popped up from the question you asked. And then I just started getting curious about what I didn't know, getting really Socratic with everything, in terms of, like, Socrates gave us one of the greatest gifts of human development ever, and that is that the only thing we know is that we know nothing. But because some part of us knows we know nothing, we love to make it all up. And it's when we forget we're making it all up that we take it too seriously. And then we get stuck on these tracks and we miss relationship. And we miss the wealth of being human because you're human. The wealth of what is wealthier than existing? What on
Right.
earth could you possibly achieve or be given that is greater than the gift of existence? That's as wealthy as it gets.
Right.
And if that is no longer like the participation trophy, that is the gold medal that we all get, that cannot be outperformed, then we get to play more of a game in this human experience. And we want to play the game the way you would play games with your family on a weekend. We don't want to be the person who doesn't want to be playing, totally apathetic, like, oh, this is stupid, I hate Pictionary or whatever. We also want to take it so seriously that we're the person punching a hole through the TV because we lost. We want to find that in between. I believe that's how we want to play the game of life too, is like, try to win because it's fun, but when it's over, remember that wasn't the point, but try to. And
Right.
then
Yeah.
also remember when it's time to back off. Remember that it can be sacred without it having to be so serious.
That happy medium. Right. And what's really interesting, right? So you talked about, really learning, right? Always wanting to learn and seeking more information. And that is so important. And I know that because I've always wanted to learn more, right? I've always wanted to seek more, not just what they were teaching me in the classroom, because I know that that wasn't going to take me anywhere. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to learn more about, as you say, right, the human experience. And it's interesting to me now because you've mentioned the fact that there's maybe a shift, going forward with the conscious. But my question that I'm begging to you right now is, the general society is drowning in a lot of different opinions and a lot of different, AI, right? The artificial intelligence. And so learning is starting to take a big turn, right? So it's less learning and more just reliance on the technology, at least from what I'm witnessing. How would you advise me or our society as this shift is happening?
Great question. Uh, I would treat it like costumes, like when we were kids. Like, get into it, play with it, see what it feels like, and then back off and see what you notice. Like I used to take popsicle sticks and sharpen them on the sidewalk and tape them to my hand. You couldn't convince me I wasn't Wolverine. Like, I was so in it. But the mom could be like, Paul, time for dinner. And I was Paul again. So go try on the costume of AI. Go try on the costume of different businesses you might want to try. Go, if you're a younger person listening to this, please don't go try to figure out your life before you're 30, 35 years old. Like go crazy, go messy. And then after 30, 35, just back it off a little bit, and do those things. But also, I'm really excited to see what learning actually looks like in this next epoch, because I don't think it's going to look like it did in the technological one. I think memorization is going to be incredibly antiquated. People want to look at, like, we used to be able to remember all these phone numbers. Now I can't remember what I had for dinner last night. They use it as like this joke of inferiority, when really, what could we use this for if it doesn't need to remember everything? What could we use this? What could our education, our learning look like if it's no longer rote and memorization is the bulk amount of it? And that may not apply to every job out there. The 12 jobs that are still worth going to college for, I'm sure, like, doctor, attorney, things like that, like AI may support, but I don't think any of us are ready for AI to take that over anytime soon. But everything else, explore, see what it's like, see what's available when we don't have to match an industrial model that isn't relevant anymore. I think that the greatest gift and the scariest thing that AI may end up providing, I do believe in this singular event, Skynet kind of thing, but I think it's not going to be Terminators and actual robots taking over in death. What I think AI is going to do is going to take this incredible box that we have been so dependent on for probably about 500 years, really dependent on at a really high level for the last 20 or 30 years. But the Cartesian era, the Newtonian era have really instilled this box of certainty, where we think that we're so certain, we think we know. And we've thought that pretty comfortably for quite some time. We feel like we can be certain, we can control things, which is garbage. You can't control anything. You can influence things, you can participate with things, But like even this, my hand, my fingers moving right now, I'm not controlling that. I'm sending a request through an incredible neural network that these just happen to comply with. They respond and say, sure, we'll do that. It's not because I'm controlling them. Ask anyone who's ever been in an accident and had that neural network get disrupted. You don't control, just like nothing is certain. And I believe what AI is going to do is provide a consciousness renaissance where at a rate, a breaknecking pace like we've never seen, it's going to push certainty so far out of reach that we'll finally get to land, in some ways you could say back in, but it'll be in a whole new version. We'll be able to land in a whole new version of wonder and awe like we've never seen before. I'm excited about that. And those who are regulating their nervous systems and being able to notice the noise of the world without being sucked into it through some kind of social codependence, without having to pick sides, without having to fight for things, which just creates people to fight against you and all these different, but being able to actually belong to yourself so you can become and create things that are worth having other people belong to. That's real relationships. That's real wealth. Being able to get into that kind of space, that's a very exciting proposition. But for those who are clinging to certainty, it's going to be really terrifying for a little while. It's going to be really scary. I'm not saying that I don't have moments that I'm not terrified or scared when I look out at the world. But there's a big difference between me feeling this desperation to do something about it versus noticing that, actually feeling it in my body, and then realizing that I don't control that. I don't even control right here, but I know I can be right here. I can't be with the noise in the world. I can't be present with that. That's out there. I can be right here. I can be present right here. And this is a really cool place to be able to do that. And this is where wonder and awe occurs. And that's the feeling we're really after. We've just got so caught up in being certain, we've choked out the wonder and awe of our lives that we can't even feel what we're actually feeling. And some deep things are shifting that are kind of demanding that we get to that place. And I think more than anything, AI and these other things that we're worried about are actually creating room for that to happen, even though it might be in ways we're not super excited about. But they're the only ways we're going to be able to actually pull it off.
Right. Well, it's the unknown, which is really what comes to my mind when you're talking through this. It's almost like you're referencing a language that we don't understand yet, right? Or we can't articulate because it's a understanding that we don't have yet, right? Because we've been, our humanity's been trained, within the past X many years to do what we're told, right? And to follow the rules. And it's very, it's very industrial, like you're saying. How can we shift, that mindset to start thinking? I mean, this is big Napoleon Hill, right? Think and grow rich. To think, right? To critically think. We're not taught that anymore. So then if AI is taking over the memory, right? And so we don't need to worry about memorying or wasting our time with that. Do you think that we just now waste even more time? How can we start becoming more, how do we start thinking more critically and, actually taking care for our moments? Because this is what we'll dive into next, of course, but the value of our time, right? That is our true wealth. How do we start regaining that ownership?
Yeah. So it's a slightly different version of the same answer. And that's being able to belong to yourself, being able to welcome your nervous system, being able to welcome the experience of you more fully. Because when you can do that, when you can actually welcome yourself, you start to realize that most of our thoughts are reactions to feelings we're not willing to feel. And it's trying to tell us a story so we don't have to feel it. The number of times I've been talking to someone and been like, well, what are you feeling? I'm feeling anxious. Well, what does that feel like? Well, it feels like everything could go wrong. Well, what does that feel like? Well, it feels like I can't make the right move and I feel very confused. What does that feel? None of those are feelings. Those are all stories. And because we've become so head-brain dominant, so head-mind dominant, our thinking is like a PR firm trying to cover up a scandal. A PR firm is never busier than when there's a scandal that they're trying to get the world to not look at. And that's what most of our brains are. But the scandal is we're not able to feel safe in our own bodies. We're not able to feel and regulate our own nervous system. The scandal is that we've been dealing with resistance to our own identity and calling it identity because it happened before we had a sense of our own ego or our own differentiation. Most of us have experienced significant trauma, and those of us who don't remember it, well, being born is the most traumatic thing that any human being can possibly experience. When you understand neurology at its core, being a totally sensory creature going from a womb, and whether cesarean or vaginal, all of a sudden, boom, you're out in this world, and like you have no concept, no idea of what just happened. And that's as traumatic as it gets. And we start building mechanisms around that we later call identity. And it's really hard to understand how those are playing into this. And when that's the case, thinking becomes a management software to just try to make sense of the storm that it has no idea how to handle. And so rather than learn how to handle it, it just becomes that PR firm constantly trying to cover up the scandal. Not because we are a scandal, but because we don't trust feeling our own bodies. We don't trust the wisdom of the body, which is the language we don't know. It's the only language we know when we're born, but we don't have any other processes available. It's the primary language we used 100,000 years ago, was an unspoken physical language. What would it be like to bring that back online with the advantages we have today, where it is safer to be human than ever before? In aggregate, there's still some really dangerous places in the world. I get that. But in aggregate, it has never been easier or safer to be human. Why won't we let it? Why are we so afraid of letting life be easier and safer? Because statistically it is. Well, because it's super noisy. Why is it so noisy? Because we're the PR firm trying to get ourselves to look everywhere but what's actually going on in the body, what's true. And so being able to reconcile that is an unbelievable advantage and superpower in any business, any position, any relationship today.
Which is amazing. And what I always like to do while we're wrapping up here is really ask how you define true wealth, right? And you were just talking about this, truth. And so right now, not going forward for, the shift that will be here, right? Not in any time, but today, right? Today. What is true wealth? And how would you define it? And how would you help our audience define true wealth?
Right now, today, I would purport that true wealth is presence. We are sensory creatures. Life is a feeling. If I were to offer anyone in your audience or you to write down anything they wanted on a paper for 5 minutes, at the end of that 5 minutes, I would snap my finger and they could have it all, as if that was possible. But there's a catch. You don't get to feel anything ever again. Would you take that deal?
No.
No way. Because that's what this all is. But feelings, the truth of feelings is the truth of what you're experiencing right now, being able to be present. So anything you create, anything you could do or give up, or if we're not able to be present, if we're not able to more fully be in our body, for it to be safe, for us to not just look at someone we love with the concept of love and with certain chemicals firing off in the brain, but to actually feel it in our full body. To not just feel like we've achieved something, but to feel the magnificence, the pricelessness of our existence, and let that magnificence feed the next thing we want to do, not what we should do that we've told we should want. That presence, I think, is the essence of true wealth.
Which is incredible. And we've lost that presence, right? If we actually realize where our time is going each day, sometimes we realize that we've lost that desire and that need for presence. So that's, incredible. So Paul, I appreciate you explaining this to us. And I think you and I could be on a couple several hour long podcasts just diving into all this stuff. And so I really appreciate your time today. What's the best way for my audience to learn more about you and to hear more wisdom from you?
They can follow me on Instagram at official Paul Blanchard, or go to my website, wholebodymindset.com. wholebodymindset.com. Or if they are a coach, a guide, a healer, a mentor of some kind, I would definitely recommend they go to unmarketablecoach.com. There's some incredible resources there to show leaders and coaches and mentors and guides how to really maximize what's happening in the market right now and what's happening in the economy. There's a different breed of leadership. There's a different breed of sales. There's a different breed of business growth, and definitely a different breed of coaching to support all that is needed. And I feel I've got some pretty amazing resources there for people that feel called to do that.
Wonderful. Well, Paul, thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to more of our content that we're going to do together, because I know that this is, something that won't just be one bike ride together, and it won't just be one podcast together. Thank you for listening to the Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth podcast. This is Nathan Barkocy, and please remember that tomorrow is never promised. So I encourage you to make the most of today.